All right, fittingly for those in LA, we're going to talk about rain. Ha! I got to get my jokes in early, you know what I mean? All right, the Atlanta Rain. This is the team with the largest variance coming in from the expansion teams, in my opinion. I think they've got a really high ceiling if everything goes well, but I think they could also bottom out and have some like crazy drama and communication issues and all sorts that could really go wrong. So I've put them 16th in my power rankings, which is perhaps unfair, but I'm kind of edging towards the potential for things to go wrong. And if things go wrong and they affect a couple of games and you end up losing games that you could win, that can really hurt your playoff chances. I think we saw that with a couple of teams. Like, for example, the inconsistency that Philadelphia Fusion and London Spitfire had throughout the regular season nearly saw them miss out on playoff spots. Like, the grand finalist teams, the teams with arguably the highest peaks in the entirety of Season 1, ended up nearly missing out on playoff spots. They were 5th and 6th seed. Right? So clearly consistency is absolutely key. If you are not able to keep together your peaks, if you only reach them occasionally, or you have games where you just go missing, then you may not even be able to get into the playoffs by the end of it. So that's why I've put the Atlanta Rain in 16th in my power rankings, but it doesn't really tell the whole story, because I think the range of places that they could really finish somewhere from 17th to about 9th. So if you think about that, I've put them like way low in terms of where they could possibly be. But I think they're more likely to be towards the bottom end. I may be wrong. Maybe they'll be able to solve all of these issues, because they are solvable. So let's think about it. Let's go through their roster to begin with. The Atlanta Rain is run by Brad, who started and scouted for the San Francisco Shock last season. Recently did an oversight episode with Monty and Thorin, which was very enlightening about the lessons that he had learned in 2018. And while I think he is a very good scout with a good eye for talent, which I think he's absolutely proven with this team, I think that's his strongest skill, actually, is his eye for talent. I don't think that he's one of the... See, this might be unfair because you never really know what people have learned from last year. I haven't had a good conversation with Brad recently, or in fact ever, actually. I've very rarely spoken to him. But he doesn't give me the impression of being the most strategic coach in the world, or the coach with the best insight into the complexities of how to make sure everyone's operating on absolutely the same page. And I think it wouldn't be unfair to say that if he had a great grasp of all of that, then perhaps he might still be with the San Francisco Shock. So I think you have to say this guy in a head coaching position has had a chance with the San Francisco Shock and has to change things from that previous approach if he wants to find success here. And I think he has changed things. For starters, what he's decided to do is not build for the future and actually just grab, as in his words, I think he said, the best talent possible from across any region. They'll keep the communication in English, so people will suffer early on if they're from Korea, etc., where some people are. But he believes that talent is really what you need. You need high individual skill. And he's certainly picked up a roster that will be capable of that. So let's have a look through it. Their core of their team is Korean. Right? Remember, their communication is going to be in English, so these guys, potentially the most important guys for their entire team, really need to be on the same page in terms of communication. So this is why I think this is the first hurdle that they need to overcome, is this communication. And that factors into stuff like coordination, the ability to even approach complex strategy, because everybody has to understand what to do at every time. You have to really understand something and internalize it in order to be able to reproduce it later on inside the game. And that requires a good understanding of English, not just being able to communicate in game. It really requires you to process it and understand it. So it's perhaps a little more of a hurdle than people anticipate. But let's see. The Korean core, in my opinion, is Pokpo and Dako, who are, and also Erster. So Pokpo is their main tank, Dako is their off tank, and Erster is their flex DPS player, really. Pokpo is a talented main tank, but now that he's in the Overwatch League, I wouldn't expect him to be an all-star. I think this tank line will be somewhere, maybe around... I think it's going to be good, but I think it's going to be probably mid-table to slightly below. And the reason that I say this is because there's a lot of good competition in the league. There are a lot of very good tank lines. I think it would be on a similar level to, for example, Nosemite and Rhea, who I was talking about in the previous episode from the Hangzhou Spark. I think Pokpo's very good at Winston and Orisa. I think he's okay at Reinhardt. I think he's serviceable but not excellent. I think Doko's got a very good diva, knows how to play it, very intelligent, plays within strategies, especially defensively, very well. Interestingly, when I've been watching a lot of his VODs, and for some reason the camera's on him a lot, so I can actually pick up quite a lot from how he plays. He seems to, when they're defending and they have set positions, he knows exactly what to do. He's always in the right place at the right time. Incredible decision making. When they're on offense and things get a little more loose and you have to adapt to where people are going and kind of read opportunities and know where your team is going and therefore know where to follow them, that's where he doesn't seem to be as good. It seems to prefer more of a rigid style. When there's like NFL plays going on, he knows exactly where to be and seems to be like absolutely on point. So a good tank line, very solid, potential to be high skill. And then they've also got Erster, who is maybe the best flex DPS player that's coming into the league this season. I'm not 100% sure on that. I think guys like, Dreamcast would say Ivy, though I haven't quite seen the same from Ivy as I've seen from Erster. Some would say Decay as well, but Decay's potentially got a slightly smaller hero pool, although like super good at Genji, super good at Tracer. Erster's a bit more flexible with his flex DPS. Either way, a very, very talented player who's going to make waves if he's actually able to be unleashed, if the communication issues get ironed out. So that's a nasty trio they've got there. Then they've got their backline of Massa, who's going to be the shot caller. Used to play for Giganti, used to shot call for them alongside LH Cloudy, who has gone to Paris. So they've kind of split up they've split up the calling line for Giganti. Massa's a very good shot caller from support, but usually a lot of the engagements and more adaptive calling comes from your main tank, because they're normally at the front or about to call the engage if they're hiding on Winston, stuff like this. So I think it will be interesting to see how Massa is still able to shot call when he doesn't have a very vocal main tank alongside him. I'm not expecting Pokepok to be able to call to the same level that Cloudy did, for sure, because he's not comfortable with English. So Massa now has a lot more weight on his shoulders in terms of that calling. So we'll see how he copes with that. By all accounts, though, a very good caller. And Kodak, who I think is fairly good. I don't think he's going to be a standout Zenyatta player within this league. The competition is just way too high. He showed some good stuff for World Cup, but again, that was against like much lower level opponents than a lot of the other leaguers been able to prove themselves against. I think this backline is going to be okay. I don't think it's going to be world beating. I think it's going to be somewhere around 2/3 down the table, maybe like a 15th, 14th kind of place backline when you rank them and compare them with everybody else. But it's solid. I don't think either of these two players are going to be problems within the team. And then their DPS, their other DPS, alongside Erster, who I think is going to be in pretty much every game, is Defran. Everyone knows Daniel Francesca, or Francesca? I don't know how you pronounce it in Danish. But this is a very interesting guy. He already quit for 24 hours because of reasons I have no idea about. And has previously been, just throwing outrageously on ladder, just obviously trying to get himself banned as much as possible. Clearly has like a self-destructive aspect to his character, but when he's not, is apparently a lovely guy, very good teammate, very hardworking. And I don't know whether anybody caught the leaked scrim from NYXL against Atlanta Reign. I don't have enough principles to avoid watching that. I watched all of that. And Defran struck me as a very reasonable, very intelligent, very communicative guy. So it seems if you can avoid him burning himself out, perhaps by overworking himself and then just deciding, fuck it. If you can avoid that aspect of Defran, it seems like you're going to get a really good player. Obviously, what I haven't said is one of the most mechanically talented players that we've ever seen in the West. Certainly the most mechanically talented player, in my opinion, to come out of Europe in terms of just his raw tracking and like raw ability on these heroes. If he's playing in a top team and can get good coaching and can improve his positioning and plays coordinated with the rest of his team, this guy could be a beast and just seems to be able to play whatever hero he is required to be put on. I think he has that kind of mindset. People might think of him as just like a soldier or tracer one trick. He did play a little bit of Genji when he had to play for Selfless. He has played Zarya as well. I think he's the kind of player where if you give him a hero, he's going to be able to master it and really get good at it. Very good mind for the game and very good mechanical ability as well. The issue is always just playing around his mentality. I think it's an excellent thing that he's partnered with Brad, this head coach, because he knows him from Selfless. He was the one that persuaded him to get back into the game. He's dealt with the previous issues that went through him. He's talked to him about the mental health issues and all of this stuff. He knows what's required to be able to get him to perform at the highest level and avoid as much as possible any burnout that might happen. It's always going to be a potential factor. I think Defran himself probably knows that, and the team knows it. Which is why as well, I've got to say that I had to edge them towards the bottom end of what I think is going to happen throughout the season, because the Overwatch League is grueling, man. Even people who were perfectly happy playing Overwatch were getting burnt out and wanting to go home and all sorts of stuff. If you're winning, things get better. If they start losing and things seem frustrating and communication breaks down, this team, I think, could implode. I hope they don't. I think this could be a really massively fun team to watch if things are going well. Now, if Defran did decide to leave, who would they get in? The other DPS they've got is Nlea, who is a Russian guy who's played for a long time in the European scene, and I think he's pretty mechanically talented. I wouldn't say that he's a ridiculous standout performer. He's not somebody that I think is going to reach crazy heights within the scene, and I also think he has a tendency to play over-aggressively and feed at times on a range of different heroes. I just think it's something about his mentality. He likes to be like in the thick of it, likes to maybe see what's going on in order to feel aware and be able to make the best decisions, but he seems to have very aggressive positioning and get picked off early in fights from a lot of the footage that I've watched. If they can solve that, then he'll be a good replacement, but I think that he could be a weak point for the team. Like, could be a fairly clear weak point for the team. And as good as the rest of your team is, if you have one player that ends up making key mistakes, that can really damage the rest of your team. So I would expect Erster and Defran to be fielded for the majority of the time, which means that there is a larger kind of weight put on Defran's shoulders. If he's not able to keep up and they have to put Nlea in and he's not able to perform at a high level, then that's a big loss for the team. Not only are you losing the mechanical and just an individual skill that Defran brings to the table, but you're also having to put somebody in who can occasionally be caught out of position and leave your man down. In general as well, they do have an incredibly small roster size. I mean, if Defran leaves, as I've said, Nlea has to be put in. But what if someone else is ill? They've only got one main tank. They've only got one off tank. They've only got one flex support. They've only got one main support. They actually, when I said they only have one main tank, they do actually have a two-way guy, Gator, but he's nowhere near ready, unless it's a Reinhardt meta. I mean, I don't think that he's going to be able to just slot into this roster. I think he's just there, essentially, to fill the 8 slots required for you to be able to sign up with an Overwatch League spot. I think that the Atlanta Reign would do very well by adding some depth to this roster on the bench, because if you have a radical meta that calls for, like, let's have quad DPS as an example, right? Because people are talking about this at the moment. Like, it's been rumored to be happening in some scrims. We've seen it happening in Korean and Chinese contenders and some of these cups that have been happening in the off season. If this is the case and you don't have an off tank that can play a good, as far as I'm aware, Dako doesn't play DPS, and then you don't have the depth on your roster to be able to bring in other people, or you don't have another off tank that can, like a guy like, I don't know, Hotbar or Badoshin or whatever, where they were playing a bunch of different roles. You don't have somebody like this on that roster, and you don't even have the depth on the bench to be able to pull from that if it's required. So, slight concern there. So you can see that in general, like in a microcosm, this seems like a really good group of 6 players. If this group of 6 players works really well together, I think they can go very far. But the intangibles around them are so all over the place that I think it's likely that at least something goes wrong with the Atlanta Reign. And that could cascade as well. If one thing goes wrong, it's more likely that other things go wrong. And we've seen from Overwatch League Season 1 that almost no team is safe from internal discord and issues, and you have to be able to deal with it over a long season. Now, it's less grueling this time. Each of the teams only has 28 games, but it's still very long. There's still a lot of games to play. Their coaching staff as well. You may have seen my power rankings where I didn't really rate the coaching staff. I actually didn't know at that point who was really involved with them, apart from Brad and a guy called Kosaris, who I wasn't familiar with. But I've talked to some people behind the scenes as well. Kosaris is a guy from the Netherlands, a positional coach that's fairly qualified for the position. I think he'll probably do a good job. Don't know too much about him though, but I don't think that deserves perhaps the underrating. Like I don't think the coaching staff is going to be bad for this team. And a guy called Silence as well, who Brad said on the podcast with Monty and Thorin was one of the smartest guys that he's met in Overwatch. He does VOD review with the team, but as far as I know, is actually going to stay remote. He's not going to come to LA with the rest of the team. And that could be really important for them as well, because if they don't have the coaching staff actually there, you know, their support system around the rest of the team is functioning at a bit of a disadvantage too. So as you can see, the Atlanta Reign, a very talented team and a lot to be optimistic about if you are potentially an Atlanta fan, or you followed the Fran for a long time, or like me, you're an Element Mystic fan and you really like Pogpo and Dako. But a lot of things could potentially go wrong with this team. They have a lot of hurdles to jump over, right? The coaching staff has to prove themselves. They have to get over these communication issues. They have to make sure that the roster size being small isn't an issue. They have to make sure that the Fran doesn't burn out. They have to make sure that the harmony within the team stays together. And then they actually have a fairly difficult season on top of that to be able to go through. So I hope that the Atlanta Reign can do well. I think it's always best when you see teams like this with high potential actually reach it. I think there's a lot of issues though, and that's why I had to put them low in my power rankings. But the only way that we'll really tell is when we get into the season. So I'm excited to see where the Atlanta Reign actually fall.